we're going to have Mechelle do a land acknowledgement for all of us.
Good evening. My name is Inhillendigit. It means mother's companion. I'm from the Omaha tribe of Nebraska and the Buffalo clan. And so I just want to recognize our land that we live here. Because Omaha's been over here for 1,000 years. Originally, we came from the great mine cities over in Ohio. So we're from the East Coast, but we've been over in the plains for 1,000 years. And so the city of Omaha is actually named after my tribe. It's pronounced Omaha, and Nebraska is pronounced Nebraska. It means for flat water. And the name Omaha means against the current or the wind. And so I would like to thank you guys for acknowledging that the land that you stand on is tribal nation land. And, you know, I'm working on trying to get Nebraska back.
Yes. Thank you so much. So tonight we are gathered to talk all about accountability, and we're going to start kind of micro and go into it macro and just try to, pitch ideas that might work in holding each other accountable, ourselves accountable, our elected officials accountable. And I'm really excited. So thank you guys so much for being here. Mechelle, since you opened up, do you want to just kind of dive in to a little bit about who you are? And
yeah, sorry about the bio. Like, in my cultural ways, is Omaha's like, and pretty much Native American, you're supposed to talk to stay humble. So I don't know how to say I'm pretty awesome. Can we cuss? Can we cuss? We're bad. No, I don't know how to say that because it's like, we're taught our life to be humble. But I'm a Native American woman. I grew up in Lincoln and Omaha. Like I said, my dad's side of the family's from Omaha, so I grew up in Omaha a bit. I have Omaha. Omaha City is one of my communities between Lincoln and Omaha, and I'm an activist first, as I like to say, a political leader, and an environmentalist and a water protector. And these are the roads I have taken many years to come on this. It's not an easy path. It's not a glamorous path, but it's just something about fighting for injustice to help anybody who needs help. There's a term that you say is that you speak for those who have no voice. And so growing up, I had my grandmother who was a big community leader in Lincoln. She helped so many people, and her style was always, forgive, forgive, forgive. I remember growing up seeing the community members, tear her down, cuss her up, talk bad about her. But as soon as they turned around and asked her for help, she helped, forgive them like that. And listen to Ernie Chamber this week at his farewell, not farewell, but his I want to call it graduation rally, whatever. He said the exact same thing, and no wonder my grandma supported him very much. He was that type of leader too. That and to be accountable is that we got to learn that people make mistakes. People are human, and so I learned that. And my leader Frank Lemire and a recent leader Don Keeler passed away in Omaha. He was an artist. He's actually, if you see those Nebraska plates with the buffaloes on it, he's the one that created. He's the artist that created that, and the foundation will go to like Native American scholarships in Nebraska. But he was also an Ainster gangster during the Wounded Knee era, and he would tell me stories about that. But that's how he had post-traumatic trauma so bad from boarding schools. He couldn't even see a church without getting sick. And so his way of expressing his trauma was his art. But all my leaders from all three of them all had the same message, is that to be good to each other, take care of each other. And so I'm trying my best as a young leader to remember that, to remember to always help others when in need. But, that's me. I got 3 boys. Not 3 boys. Oh my goodness, jinxing myself. I got 2 boys. I got 2 sons, Cyrus and Moses. And, I grew up like my grandma and my grandpa used to say, whatever we're in, you're in. So I used to go protest and rallies when I was younger. And so I bring Cyrus and Moses. And so I'm just so happy that they're learning from their true history and experience from these different protests and rallies. And my youngest son, they're just both proud of being water protectors. Moses is about almost a little over 3 when went to Standing Rock. And, if you talk to him, he'll tell you, I'm a water protector. He's just so proud of it. So they're really active in that world of protecting water and land and standing up for injustice. So I'm happy that, they want to pick up that passion too.
that's so beautiful. Thanks for sharing a little bit about yourself. Ozy, you wanna take a swing at it?
We're just introducing ourselves?
Yeah.
Okay. Hi, everyone. I am Ozy Aloziem. I was born here. You don't know where I'm at. I'm currently in Omaha, Nebraska, but I have been living in Occupy Denver for the last 5 years at this point. Ooh, that's wild. It'll be 5 years on the 17th, so in 2 days, which is the land of the Cheyenne, the Arapaho, the Ute, and the Sioux. But my family, we are Igbo, which is one of the oldest tribes of Nigeria. And so both my parents immigrated from Nigeria. And so that's definitely an important part of who I am and how I move through the world. As far as what I do and what I'm about, I do work around racial equity and racial healing, personally, professionally, artistically, all of those things. And so I dabble in that in a couple of different roles, but that's what my orientation is around how do we promote racial equity? How do we create space for racial healing? So that's what I spend my days doing.
Thanks. And Riley, last but not least, what's up?
Good evening, everybody. I'll be real quick. From Lincoln, Nebraska, live in Omaha now. I'm currently just starting my second year of law school at Creighton, and just been trying to stay involved. Recently been doing some legal observing here in Omaha for some of the protests that have been happening over the last couple months now. So that's me.
Sweet. Thank you guys so much for being here. I'm really excited to start diving in. Again, I'm Maria. I love conversations and chatting and just getting to learn from all of you. So thank you guys so much. Okay, we're going to just start out with, when was the last time that you had to hold yourself accountable and what did you learn from that?
Should I go first?
Go for it.
Okay, I guess I have two experiences. I had a personal experience. I heard a good friend of mine, because I was still like hurting my feelings after we lost Dr. Frank Lemire, and I felt like he should have voted for Preston Love, and so I was mad. I was mad, and I had to bite the bullet and apologize. He was right about the voting, how the voting was going to go down because it was split tie, and so I had to go and apologize and tell him I'm sorry for being so hurt and upset, and all he asked me was to listen. To the reason why he voted. And so that was like last time I was like really holding myself accountable because, like I said, I got dramatic. I got dramatic. And he's always been a good friend. He's still a good friend to this day. I called him about everything. He's going to law school, so I talked to him a lot about our issues, and I like talking to him because even though he's in nature a white man, his thinking is more very open to understand us persons of color. And so, I like talking to him because then he explains to me how the white man thinks. That's what he said, this is how they think. I was like, oh, okay, so we're talking like that. But another one time it was with the community of Omaha, because like I said, I grew up in Omaha too. And so I think it was about a year ago when I was doing like register, get out to vote at the powwow, and being a mother of two, single mother of two, I get and busy with all this stuff. Sometimes I don't go around my culture activity as much as I would like to. And so at that powwow, like I just had a bunch of different relatives telling like, Omaha's your community too. You need to show up here. You need to help us here. And, and it was a lot of relatives. You need to come around more often, come to these culture events, come to our issues. And so anytime like community members I see that needs help in Omaha, I will help them. Even though I'm from Lincoln, and it don't matter. The real big one last time was when I had my tonsils. I just got my tonsils taken out in February, right? And the doctor said that was gonna, it was gonna, whoop my ass, and I didn't believe him, and it did. And it was just like the second day, and I was trying to space out the medications because I didn't want to be all doped up all the time. So I was trying to bear the pain as much as I could before I took the meds, but then I also had to take it. If I didn't take it, I couldn't swallow. So I was trying to do that. And a friend of mine, Jennifer, called me 11:30 in the night and was going off about how there was an inmate in Douglas County Jail, a Native man that was coughing up blood. He was really sick. She said a lot of the other Native inmates were calling and trying to get help. And she said she called the ambulance a couple of times. She talked down there to get him help because they're afraid that he was going to die. And me being sick and me being hurt and I couldn't hardly talk. I just listened to her and I told her, okay, this is what I need from you. I was like, I just need you to send me an email of detail. what's the inmate's name, which pod, give me the description, and I will like forward it to like people, the contacts I know. So it was about an hour, and I was sitting there waiting because I was so much in pain. I was like, oh my God, where is she at? Because she was still calling, trying to make contacts with everybody else, and she was still frantic. And so I finally called her back. I said, look, I really can't talk. I was like, I really need to take this painkiller, and I need to, get the rest, but, please, I was like, just send me that. So she sent me that, and I forwarded it to the chief of police, to the one director of the county jail, and a couple other contacts I had up there, and they jumped on it just like that, and they got him into the medical treatment, and they decided that he was too severe, and they took him to the hospital. And so when he came back, I think about a week and a half later, he was really healthy, and he was so grateful that people on the outside helped him. So it's just like that, when community members ask you for help, and it'd be like, any time of the day, you got to do the best you can, whatever situation you're in. And it's hard as activists because you're trying to be the best activist you can, but then you still have to support and do your life. I still am working on that balance, but because activism don't pay, and so I'm still trying to find that balance as an activist. But that's how you be accountable to your community, is that you try your best to be there, to be reliable. I think accountability and reliability goes hand in hand.
That's good. Thank you. I feel like we can all kind of identify with that right now, especially just in the culture that we're living in. It's like, how do we balance working so hard for everybody else right now, but also take care of ourselves? Let me know when anybody figures that out, because I need help. Thank you so much for sharing that. Ozy or Riley?
Ozy, go ahead.
Yeah, so there are two things that come to mind. One is a process that I'm in currently. And the short of it is I have a very close friendship that I care deeply about. And something happened within this friendship where they did something that caused me harm. And I have been really upset about it, and have been wanting to just kind of step away from the friendship and not cut this person off per se, but I have been finding myself really sitting in my anger, and the accountability that I believe in doesn't believe that people are disposable, right? And so I've been really grappling with myself around what does it mean to be accountable to this practice, to this thing that I believe in, around how we should always be working to be in right relationship with the people that we are in community with. And so it's something that I am processing and trying to figure out with myself as I tried to navigate what happened. And then an example, I guess, also recent of a time of being held accountable, I recently planned a symposium that was around advancing racial equity and inclusion in the workplace. And I had tried to find a closed captioning option and didn't realize that the Zoom feature, you had to have someone like doing it in real time. I thought for some reason that it was just automatically automated, which was silly and an oversight on my part. And so when I realized that I'd emailed all of the people that had indicated on their registration about that issue, and let them know that the closed captioning would be available in the recordings. But during the symposium itself, during the introduction, folks were really upset and expressed their frustration that this conversation around inclusion wasn't really accessible to some people. And so in real time, I was being held accountable to this thing that wasn't really a part of this overall picture of equity. And the way that we handled it was really to say sorry, that we had made an oversight and were open to suggestions for solution on how to remedy that. And what that ended up being was that folks emailed pretty quickly and were like, hey, this option works. And then also someone that reached out and was like, hey, I have this contact. And so by the second day, we had a closed captioning option. We had live ASL interpreters. And that was really because I said, yes, I hear you. I messed up. I'm sorry. And I would like to fix this and be better. So how can I work with you to make sure that I'm not harming you in this way? And that was a real, I think, learning moment. Not even I think, I know it was a real learning moment to be held accountable on such a large platform, because there was over 1,000 people in that room watching me stumble through this. And so that was really humbling, and I think a good way to practice this thing that I've been preaching.
Yeah. Can you forward me those tips? So we can get that on here too. I was just talking to my friend Tiff today about trying to figure out ASL on Zoom too, so we can be super inclusive in that sense. But especially right now in the pandemic, I totally feel you. It's like, how do you intentionally be inclusive like this? It's because you're going to be held accountable because we want to include everybody, and everybody deserves to be included. And so making sure that that's accessible in whatever avenue that may be. So thank you for sharing that, Ozy. All right, Riley.
So with this question, the first thing I thought of was not too long ago, I had a Facebook post where it wasn't very long, but I just, had a little message in there about just what was going on in Omaha. And I got a message a little bit after I posted it that someone said, hey, really.
Oh no, you froze.
However, you had a line in there where, oh, are we good?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. Wasn't sure. I was messaging. He said you have a line in there in your post that I had to bring it up, and I think you meant something else, but for me and my background, it's just something that I feel like I needed to bring to your attention. And I told him immediately. I said, hey, I appreciate you bringing that up to me. Like I did not realize the connotation that this had. So I went in there, and he suggested you might want to just omit this line or change it in some way. So I went back to it and I looked at it and I said to myself, like, what am I actually trying to say here? What was the intent that I was trying to get across that clearly I did not? And then I wrote it in a way that was more clear and to the point. And that's something that, again, I told him, hey, I'm a work in progress. I appreciate it. Like, anytime you can bring this to my attention, like, I'm not going to be defensive. Like, I know I mess up all the time. So thank you for that. And, but that's one of the things that I'm trying to be better about is I think there's so many things that we say, maybe colloquially, that we don't understand maybe the background to it, or why we say that certain things that we do. And for me, trying to take a step back and say, when I say this, what do I actually mean? What am I trying to get across? What am I trying to say? And that helps me refine my language and try to use language that's acceptable to everybody and accessible to everybody. And so I try to keep that in mind, and being held accountable by the community when someone messages you and says, hey, you used the wrong language. Just saying, hey, I thank you for that. Thank you for that. I apologize, and I'll fix it, and I'll do better next time. So.
Mm-hmm. And I can also appreciate somebody just going to you directly and asking you to change rather than just like totally dragging you publicly, which sometimes that's just the way people want to do things in the heat of the moment. That's like one of the reasons I hate Facebook, because I'm like, just message me and we can have a conversation about this, like, or come to nightcaps and then tell me to my face, basically, is why I started this, because I'm like, I'm done fighting with people on social media. Like, I'm going to learn how to have these conversations in person. So thank you guys so much for sharing all of that with me. If you could give like a dictionary short description of what accountability is, what would that be?
I think, I go off like accountability is reliability, it's always, I was always taught that you want to show people that you can be reliable and trusted. So you have to show up, do the work, say what you mean, and do what you say. But accountability has to stop with a lot of truth. It does a lot with truth. And that was one thing that my mentor, Dr. Fred Limmer, always taught me: stand on the side of truth. But nowhere to tell you, truth isn't very popular. So you gotta learn to be, find your truth with accountability, even within yourself. If sometimes, like I said, you have to hold yourself accountable. Like, yeah, I should have done that. I should have said that. I should make this right. I think maybe because I'm in recovery, I've been sober for 14 years now. And so like the AA process tell you, like, try to make amends the best you can, if it doesn't hurt other people, you or other people. And so, with me, that was a big thing about me. Like, when in the past 14 years, is like, if I hurt somebody, should I make it up? And usually it's like the night process, right? I have a daily reflection, like, okay, well, maybe I shouldn't have done that. Maybe I stepped on someone's toes. Let me go back. Maybe my anger got in the way. Let me apologize. Let me explain myself. And now I get better. When it happens, I'm not like forced to take an action, but I can recognize it. And so a lot of times I won't do it, or if I do it, apologize, make it right, correct. And I think that's what accountability is, as a leader, you have to be accountable a lot of times from what I learned from what you say and post, even on social media. I post a song. One time people got mad and I was like, man, I really like the song, And I just think it's when people start putting you on that pedestal, then it's like there's critics out there. And me being, like I said, taught humble and stuff, I always tell people when they start putting me on that pedestal and I say, no, I'm human, I will mess up. That's just the human nature. Don't put me up there on that level. I'd rather be on the same level with my colleagues. So I think that accountability and reliability, like I said, goes hand in hand.
Thank you. That's great. That's always like a good thing to remember, is like approaching, like being a leader, reminding yourself that, and each other, that we're all human and that we have to give each other grace in that way. Thank you so much. Anybody else want to give a little definition to accountability?
I can go. I was watching a Instagram live with Brittany Cooper, who is the author of Eloquent Rage, I guess a couple months ago now. And she said something that really resonated with me, which is, I don't claim a politic that I haven't worked my way through, which is to say, like, I don't claim things unless I've really thought about what this thing means. I've asked myself, how are other people interpreting, and have had conversations, right, and read up about this thing. And so when I think about accountability, one of the definitions that really resonates with me is how the Audre Lorde Project, which does a lot of work around transformative justice, defines it, which is really, at the end of the day, about repairing harm. How do we intervene when harm is caused? How do we help heal when harm is caused? How do we repair when harm is caused? And what work are we doing to heal the harm that we've caused and to heal from the harm that has been caused to us? And so I could say a lot of things about that, but at the end of the day, it is about repairing harm. That's how I would define accountability.
Thank you. I feel like we need to check the notes at the bottom of the podcast for all the, I don't even know what they say, but we need somebody to be taking notes about all these books. We have a question already from the stream for Mechelle.
Okay.
How can white folks make land acknowledgements at gatherings when they're in public?
When they're in public, if you haven't found like a local Native American in that tribe and area, then I would do some research. I would reach out, like even to the tribe itself, just to get more information, and just say, we're standing on this land. We need to recognize that this land belongs to the Native Americans, and we need to respect it. Actually, the land acknowledgement started from. Have you ever heard of something people? They're an Alaskan group, a rock band from Alaska group, and they actually had a Grammy. Oh, I can't remember something. It's called. I can't remember the name, but they have a really good song. It's a really good song. I'll think about it. But they won a Grammy, but they were down here last year, and they went into Omaha. They were playing at the Bourbon Theater. And so, like, I am Omaha. Like, at last minute, I got thrown in to do a land recognition. And so I got spoke to 1,000 people. And the first time it made me nervous. All the years I've been speaking, and they're like, why are you nervous? I was like, because. I was like, they came to see you guys. They didn't come to see me. I'm used to when people come and see me speak. But they're like, no. And so I had a real great reaction. But they said they learned this land acknowledgement when they went to Australia. And when they were on touring, and they were opened up for a band in Australia. And that was the first time they had the Aborigines from Australia come to this big, huge concert and gave land acknowledgement. And ever since then, they're a band that they go all over the place, and they always trying to find local Native Americans. So if you can't have
badass.
I know. If you can't, I can't remember it. I'll think of it. I'll Google it later here and tell you guys. But it was a good band. But like, if you cannot, as a white person, if you really can't find a Native American in your area, it's always good to research that territory and just mention the names of the tribes. Like, this belongs to them. This was their territory. Just say, just please respect and start showing more respect and honor to them, you know.
Mhm.
That's the best I can give you.
Thank you. Okay, we have another question.
Riley didn't answer the last one.
Oh yeah, go Riley, do you have a definition of accountability for you?
Yeah, so I just wanted, it's just like one paragraph real short from the Little Book of Restorative Justice. It's a very good book, a very short book, very great for anyone who wants to kind of learn about this for the first time. But they had a really great passage in here about accountability. I thought I would just share it with people. Restorative justice has brought an awareness of the limits and negative byproducts of punishment. But beyond that, however, it is argued that punishment is not real accountability. Real accountability involves facing up to what one has done. It means encouraging those who have caused harm to understand the impact of their behavior, the harms that they have done, and urging them to take steps to put things as right as possible. This accountability, it is argued,
Oh no, you froze.
cause harm and better for society as well. I'm sorry
You
about
caught
that.
up. No,
I caught
that's
up.
okay.
But anyway, good quote. I just thought that it really kind of sums up accountability just real briefly.
Thank you for that. We seriously, somebody please from the audience take notes on all these book recommendations. Okay, how are we already a half in? I hate when this happens. A half hour. Did I talk? I don't know what words are coming out right now. Okay, so kind of like you just said, like being able to talk to people and holding them accountable, especially in your interpersonal relationships and in your close-knit community, that can sometimes be a challenge, like more specifically holding your friends and family accountable. It can be a difficult undertaking. And so it's really important though, to help the growth of that relationship and to be able to like work through that. So you don't have like any resentment building up, I feel like. How have you guys navigated holding those kinds of people together? Holding them accountable. Sorry.
So
go ahead, Ozy. Go ahead.
Thank you. Sorry. I talk about accountability a lot. Like I realized, I don't know, a few years ago that we don't really know what we're talking about when we talk about accountability, and we assume as if other people are operating from the same definition. And so I've just been having really honest conversations about what is accountability, not just in general, but like in our interpersonal relationships. What does that look like and feel like for you? And what is our commitment to this friendship so that we know what we're actually accountable to? And so having those kinds of conversations, but the accountability that I believe in isn't a punitive thing. So it's not this thing that I can enforce on other people. I think it's Angela Davis that talks about you can't be accountable. You can't make other people accountable, right? But you can create the sort of circumstance that invites other people and allows them to hold themselves accountable. And so I think about that a lot, and what that means to create policies, to do all of these other things to ensure that people are in space to hold themselves accountable. But I don't try to police other people's behaviors in those ways, but try to embody what I mean when I talk about accountability, so other people can't help but to also try to be in a righter relationship with me, knowing what my definition of it is and knowing how good it feels to be in that righter relationship. Is how I think I go about it.
So kind of like setting boundaries throughout your relationships and just normalizing talking about accountability so that when you do get to that point where somebody needs to be held accountable, they already know where you stand on this topic, kind of.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, that's
beautiful. Oh my God, Ozy, that's what I believe in too, because my years of experience and being black sheep. It really is, from my cultural point of view, we have historical trauma. That's when Native Americans, we suffer all that genocides and boarding school. And so it's also generational trauma. And so the past few years, as I've been learning that even though I held myself accountable, even though I, don't allow, start working on my trauma 14 years ago, the historical trauma, and start creating healthy boundaries for myself and my family, my sons, not everyone in my community is up to that level. Not everybody in my community recognize that, and that they still live in that dysfunction of historical and generational trauma. And so to them, that's what's normal to them. And so I learned, very quickly that even though I'm an honest person and, you know, accountable person, you know, a leader and stuff, not everyone's like that. And so when you kind of like expose the truth to them, they don't like it. So like, you know, like I said, so it's like all I could do for accountability in my community is to show my leadership, show by example, and, you know, creating that space. Okay, this is what I'm going to do, and this is what I need from you. And if you can't do that, then this probably is not for you. And I'm not saying this forever, but I'm learning that everyone is learning how to function in their own time and space, and maybe they don't recognize that it's dysfunctional compared to I do. So I have to learn to like, I can't tell them like, hey, that's dysfunctional. Hey, hey, this is the truth. Some people are just not ready for that in my community. Like I said, it's very hard because even her historical trauma, like even the elders now, they don't act like elders. They're very, how would I say this? Very like, they're like bullies. I think it's because they feel entitled because they're old, they could bully you. And when I was growing up, my elders, when I was very little, they weren't like that. They were very kind, patient, loving, like elders are supposed to be, and they're supposed to teach you lessons. And they don't get after you like that. They don't scold you. They don't tear you down. And so I even noticed that how much this generational trauma affect, even now. And I remember hearing my Aunt Loretta one time talking about like, I don't even know how to be an elder, and I'm coming to that age, and I look around and I see these other elders not acting like elders, what I'm supposed to do. And so it's just that accountability. I can't force that accountability to anybody who's not ready for it. All I could do is keep leading by example, keep showing like this is what accountability it looks like, this is what healthy boundaries are. um, and like I said, I told my friends before, like, what I learned from now, I can't, like I said, I can't force this or anybody. I let people BS. If someone's over here BSing, fine. That's what they want to do. That's what they want to do. But when they come to me with that BS and try to, affect me with that, that's when I stand like, no, these are my boundaries, and no, and that's where a lot of people think I'm difficult because of that. They're like, oh well, that's their excuse. Like she's just difficult. It's like, no, it's called healthy boundaries.
I feel like we need a whole nightcaps on healthy boundaries because that's very essential for relationships. And I'm learning that. I just like recently learned that I'm codependent and like overgive so much.
And that's the other issue, because codependency is a Northern American term, right? Because if you go a lot of other places, we're very tribalistic tribes, and that's where that's where I see the dysfunction, because we're taught as a tribe to help each other, don't leave each other behind. But now, since we have like all these traumas of, boarding schools has sexual trauma that passes down the generation. They have alcoholism, it has violence and stuff, and so we're still taught like, well, even though this is still our tribe, this is still family, but they're hurting us, and that's another issue. Is like, you have to find that balance in codependency, what they call it. But for us Native Americans, it's like, we talk about taking care of each other. So as I got older and wiser, I seen that, like, okay, but we never had that issue before. We never had those traumas before. We had a healthy boundary and a healthy way before all that came. And so it's very hard. Like I said, it's very hard.
I'm going to let Riley answer, and then I want to get back to what you just said.
I'll try to be quick. I think there's a parallel here you can make with on the micro and macro level. So I think the two answers we just got were really good. So on the micro level, I don't know that you can hold somebody accountable totally if they're not willing to kind of start that, inner, I guess, monologue, if you will. Like there has to be some acknowledgement that like I need to do certain things, and there's a way to get there, or maybe multiple ways to get there. But also on a more macro level, when we talk about accountability and how we address it as like a community or society, I think it's very easy to want to go like the punitive route. But I think that for people who maybe have experienced trauma and in their past, and they cause harm to people, I think it's our first nature, just because in Western society or civilization like this, or what we try to do is we try to just be punitive, and that's how we hold people accountable. But I think what happens is it makes people feel like a victim of the system, and therefore they never have to hold themselves accountable because they just get defensive, if that makes sense. Like our entire justice system, for instance, does this, right? It's adversarial in nature. So it never asks anyone to confront the things that they've done and be held accountable. It actually asks them to be literally the defense. Your job is to get a lawyer and defend yourself from the things you've done wrong, right? So I think on account of, as far as being how do we hold people accountable, I think it's on the micro level, there actually is some of those parallels between the macro level there.
Okay, we have a question from the stream, I believe.
Can I jump in real fast to that?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and to that point, like when you think about our criminal punishment system, right, because it isn't about justice in any way, but the goal with it is not to repair the harm, which is what accountability is. It's to stop the harm, right? And so if your only goal is to stop the harm, you're not thinking about how to restore relationships. You're not thinking about anything else beyond that. And so I think that's just important to name when we also are thinking about accountability. It's like, what are we wanting from this process? Do we want the harm to just stop? And if that's where we stop, that my definition of freedom is more expansive than that. I don't believe in living a life where I'm just not being harmed. I believe in living a life where I'm in right relationship with the people that I'm around. And so how do we move from just like, I want you to stop doing this thing, but I want you to stop doing this thing and I want to be in a better relationship with you. So how can we get to that place together? And how can I not be harmed by you in the future, kind of thing? And so that when it comes to accountability and acting it out in our interpersonal relationships or whatever, from a macro to a micro level, I think is just important to think about when it comes to what is our goal for accountability.
And both parties, I think, also have to be like willing and ready to discuss it, because sometimes like the victim isn't ready to discuss it. And then it kind of creates a more tension system, and then people get defensive and put walls up. That's just kind of my little 2 cents. Okay, stream question. Okay, I'm gonna try, and that was a big question. How do you deal with the guilt you may feel with being held accountable? Did that sum that up pretty well? Okay.
Just recognize your feeling. I mean, nobody likes to be wrong. Nobody does. Nobody likes to be wrong, but you just got to own that feeling, like and it's a guilt. If they're talking about guilt, what kind of guilt are they talking about? I mean, it depends on like the situation, I guess. It's, what kind of accountability, because you hurt another person or individual or group, and you will have that guilt. Mm-hmm. And it's just best to, like, recognize that guilt. Maybe if you're not, you got to check your emotions too, because what if, you get angry or you're hurt, you need to, like, I guess I would say clearly recognize why you're hurting, because anger is a secondary emotion. It usually comes from fear or hurt or, so when you have that guilt, I would just try to break it down, why am I feeling this guilt? What's really bothering me, what's triggering me? And so it's a process. I would try to process it. That's the best answer I can give right now about the guilt. I guess, like I said, nobody likes to be wrong.
Yeah, I remember, I was listening to this podcast from Brene Brown on shame and accountability, and I used it in my city council speech, like this quote that she said, and it's like, being held accountable doesn't mean that we're shaming you just because you feel shame. That's not the same thing. It's just like, it's really good. Go listen to the podcast. But that, I think, helped me realize that, like, when I'm being held accountable, the shame and guilt that I'm feeling is okay, and I need to work through it, but I'm not being shamed. I'm being held accountable.
And to Michelle's point, it's like, one, we don't, and this goes back to like what colonization has done to us, right? We're not connected to ourselves, we're not connected to our feelings. And so when we have our feelings, we don't sit and spend time with them. Because what is that guilt really teaching you? What are you actually feeling guilty about? Is it because you knew that you should have done something and you did the other thing? Is it because you recognize that you have caused harm? Like, what is that teaching you, and how can you learn from that lesson versus how do you sit in this wrong thing that you may have done and only center how you feel about that, right? Because guilt is a very selfish emotion and doesn't create space for you to move forward or to learn or to do any of those things. But before you can move forward, you have to recognize what you're actually feeling. And so I think naming that guilt, having a conversation with it. Sometimes I use a writing prompt where it's like, if this is an emotion that I'm feeling, what would it look like to take it out for tea, to sit across from it, to introduce myself to it, to have it introduce itself to me, and to really learn about what it is and where it's coming from so that I can leave it where it needs to be and move forward into something else. And so, yeah, figure out where that guilt is coming from and why it's there and what it's teaching you so that you can learn from that lesson.
I think you touched on an important topic there too, is realize that the guilt and shame you're feeling for being held accountable is centering yourself as well, which you can like sit with, but also then in response to being held accountable, remember that this is about you in a way, but it's also about the person voicing their thoughts on whatever you did.
Yeah, that was a great.
Oh no, frozen, Riley.
Guilt is, I think it's a feeling that's kind of, oh God, I'm so sorry. I don't know why it keeps doing that. I'll try to be quick so it doesn't keep happening. I think guilt is an emotion that you can kind of feel as a child, not like one of those, toddler type feelings. I think it's a little too maybe evolved for a toddler, but not far after that, 3, 4, 5 years old, they can kind of realize, oh, I feel bad about something I did, right? So it takes a certain level of, emotional maturity to be able to kind of dig a little deeper and kind of say like, what is really causing me to feel this way, and how do I not center myself for here? Because obviously you're feeling something beyond yourself to feel guilt. So yeah, but I think the previous answer was great.
Mm-hmm. And I will just add on, like the other piece, and I think this is also like part of the US culture, Western culture, and this idea around perfectionism, is that what is also at the core of guilt is like, we are perceiving ourselves as a good or bad person, and we shouldn't be striving to be good people. We should be striving to do good things. And so if you shift from what does this thing say about me to what does this thing say about what I did and how can I do differently, I think that is also a helpful framing for like when you are sitting in guilt, how to move away from it.
Yes, thank you. Okay, so this is kind of a follow-up question. How do we work in staying humble in the process of accountability? We all want to listen and learn and change, but ego often gets in the way.
Ego is a big thing. Ego is really big, and I think maybe because, like I said, my experience with in recovery, that was one of the things that you had to tackle. You had to tackle your ego, or your ego will cause you to relapse. So with accountability and ego, that's, like I said, nobody likes to admit that they're wrong. Like even my situation where, like I was telling you about Minneapolis, how the group I went with, we tried to talk to them for 2 hours that, they're setting up martial law, they placed a curfew, they will mess us up. Please, we kept trying to tell them, don't go there, want to see action in frontline, the action and stuff, like they really gonna see it. And so they were upset that I laughed about it afterwards, but I'm like, I was raised, as a colored woman, by a colored grandmother. I was raised that, I told you not to do that, you hurt yourself, that's what you get, that's my mentality. But I feel like I said that accountable, I try my best to apologize, but they didn't want to see the side where I felt like I didn't want to go put myself in the front line, especially when I wasn't asked to put myself in front. Like I said, if the Native community asked me, and I have done before, but I wasn't trying to, with this tactic, I wasn't trying to go in anybody else's Native community. I don't ever go in nobody else's Native community and cause trouble, And with the whole, the city put the curfew on, and me as a Native American woman, the high rate of murder and missing Native American women in Minneapolis, I had so many activist friends tell me don't go out, Native women were murdered, everything. And I had my sons, like I thought about my sons on this trip before and after, like, I'm going there to help my Native community, learn what I see, learn what I can, see what I see. It was never my intentions to do that. And I felt like, like I know we're both in the wrong, but like it also put me in a very bad position that when my friends got arrested, I didn't know like if I had to stay and try to get them out. I didn't know nothing like that. So it bothered me too, because like people, their families, wanted them to be safe, and they came with me and they took off, wandered off. We separated, and and that, like, they didn't realize how much accountability that put on me. Like, hey, you guys got hurt and you got arrested, your families will be mad at me, And so it was like I said, it was a very a big, strong lesson learned. Like really, like my elder friend told me, like, remember, like, well, next time remember to know who's in your backseat, what their plans are. And their plans were very different from my plans. And, it is hard because, like I said, they don't see how much danger they could have put me in. Like, and they didn't realize how much danger until they got into it. But I kept trying to make them recognize that this is dangerous. I've been beat by the cops before. Native American women are the highest rated murder missing women. This is basically martial law. And they did call martial law that Monday, following Monday, but they were setting it up to martial law. Like they put a curfew on. That means really these cops can shoot to kill. It's not like going to Standing Rock. It's not going to these other protests that we have grounds. It's like we're going literally into a city war zone of a National Guard or military state that, that's their grounds. Like, we became unfair. We didn't have no guns. I mean, it was very, and I felt like they were upset with me, and I felt that, and I tried my best to apologize. And my ego kept getting into play too. It's like, but you guys really try to put me in danger. I have kids, and that's always in the back of my mind. So like, I learned to just be more clear of who you're rolling with, what mission are they on. Obviously, it comes up to we were on 2 different missions.
Yeah, and again, setting those boundaries.
Yeah.
I have another, or does anyone have any last comments on that kind of last ego question? Okay, I have Dewan asks, can we talk about white guilt and how to reconcile that?
White guilt. So if anybody else would talk first, anybody else can talk, but I got a good story about this. Anybody else?
I feel. Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
Go ahead, Riley.
I feel like that might have been my cue there. Yeah. So I guess for me, that's obviously a term I think we're all familiar with. But I don't, there are certain things in the past that I have no control over. And the only thing I can do is try to learn the most that I can and work forward in a way that I will try to correct previous wrongs from people that look like me and hold power. So I understand that there are a lot of, I think, white people that operate in spaces where they feel like maybe they're trying to do things from a place of guilt, kind of like we talked about earlier. But the thing is, I think, again, you really need to dig a little deeper inside and kind of be like, why am I feeling guilty for maybe something that I can't control how this country was conceived. There's nothing I can do about that, right? All I can do is try to work towards using my voice, my actions, the work that I do to work to dismantle oppressive systems and institutions that uphold these problems, right? So, so you can feel guilty about it and you can be upset about it, but I don't know how much that helps anybody. I don't think it helps anybody at all. In fact, I think that all you can do is work on your actions and kind of move forward with that.
Ozy?
So my first thought was I'm not, that has nothing to do with me. That doesn't concern me. And I say that because I am not in the business of trying to change people and make them better, white or otherwise. I am in the business of creating and normalizing policies and procedures that make it so people can't help but be better. But I will take that back a bit and say that I also try to bring feeling and emotion into the professional world, right? And so it's normalizing the fact that all of these emotions are going to come up as we are doing these things. How do I employ people with strategies to practice self-reflexivity, to name what's coming up, to do the work that they need to do to be able to show up for conversations and creating, like I've been bringing like breath work and meditation into conversation, right? So it's like people then, if they have the tools to process and name their own stuff, they can do that over there. And then they can show up and do the work that needs to happen over here. But I'm not going to walk you through that. I'm not going to hold your hand and like sit with you and help you name your feelings because that's not my job. I don't that's not what I spend my time doing, right? And also just using my own example of how I've navigated through the guilt I feel around my privileges. I took a class called Disrupting Privilege Through Anti-Oppressive Practice, and the whole class we were put into a cohort, and in our cohort we moved through the world from one of our power identities, right? And so I had to work through my cisgender privilege, and there's a lot of guilt that comes with like recognizing the ways in which Black trans women aren't held to the same respect as me, right? And so because I was able to go through that experience, I think I have a better understanding of the feelings that come up with white guilt and all of those things. And so because I know what work I had to do in order to be able to move through that, I can help people have access to the tools to be able to do that work without doing that work for them.
Yeah, like sometimes I just don't have time to help you with that. I'm like busy over here, working over here. You go do that over there and then come back because we need you in the work, but deal with that elsewhere.
Well, like I said, my experience, it would be from a Native woman is, I would say, patience, and it really sucks. It really sucks. But if you want to be a leader and to have something evolve and move, you have to have patience. So when I was in human services 10 years ago at Southeast Community College, I was taking a human service class, and one of them was Intro to Multicultural Counseling. And I was the only brown person in that class. Everybody was white. A lot of them were different ages, from young to 50. And it was just this little bitty book about that big, and it was just about true history, like true actual history, not what they learned all their life. It was actually true history. So I remember my classmates couldn't, like, it was really like bizarre to see them so surprised and shocked, like they didn't know this was going on, and a lot of them couldn't grasp the reality, a lot of them couldn't accept it. But towards the end of the class, I remember, and I was always running late. So the first time I was like, I'm gonna be here early because it's a test, right? It's a test. So I show up early for the test studying, and I just remember I looked up and they all surrounded me, and I was like, oh, this is it. This is it. They got me. I was like, this is it. They're taking me out. But I remember them asking me, they're like, is this true? Before the teacher came in, I was like, what's true? Like, everything we learned in this book, is it true? And I was like, yeah, it's true. I was like, well, I want to ask you guys a question. And like, well, I was like, how can we both live in the exact same world and you guys never seen this, never knew about this, never heard of this going on? And then one of my classmates, it really struck a chord to me. She said, well, if you was taught to live and stay inside this box, and they taught you never to look outside the box, you don't look outside the box. And so it's a very systematic racist structure that we have that's breeding this racism and hate with a lot of the white people, right? And so when it comes to white guilt, I think that, if you want to see change, if someone wants to really change, they'll work with you, and you work with them with that, because it's easy to berate someone or downgrade them, like, yeah, that is true, and this and that. And because what that moment right there, when she said that actually calmed a lot of me. Like, I said, it's not me, it's you. And so like all that anger that I used to have, going through this, messed up system in life, it really melted away. Like after seeing that big picture, that understanding that it really isn't me, it's them. It's how they were, I would say, trained to be a white person in white society. And so that gave me a lot of patience with a lot of these people that wanted to come up and welcome you. One thing I just can't stand though is white savior. I can't. It's not me. That's not.
We talked about that.
Yeah, I'm trying to figure out how to battle that.
Oh, that's a whole nother thing.
Yeah.
We'll keep moving along here because we're already at 9. I hate when this happens. I need like 10 nightcaps on different kinds of accountability. So I'll try and keep this moving along. Okay, so kind of going back to a little bit of what we talked about earlier of like what our experiences are, either from the Native community, the Black community, but what do those communities teach us about restorative justice and collective ownership, and what can we learn from that? I'm trying to work through right now, like in my personal life, just dealing with the fact that like I'm half colonizer, half colonized. And so what does that mean for me? And so yeah, I would love to hear about your guys' experiences in your own communities about how you guys have seen that you don't see maybe in white culture.
So me, like I said in the little mini bio, I'm second generation urban native. So that means that my parents were urban and their parents came off the reservation. And so me being second generation urban Indian, I grew up in the city. I never lived on the res. I go back for home for ceremonies and stuff like that, but I never lived on the res. And so we have, there's, I call it tribalism sometimes. So sometimes there's this tribalism that natives on the reservation kind of think of me like of being white or colonized, as you say. And then I think of them like, you guys should be more open-minded about things, So it's different, like I said, compared to what's going on the reservation and what's going on in the city. So then you got the city urban natives, and we're all from different tribes, When we're here in the cities, it's not just one tribe, it's different tribal, and we have different tribal backgrounds and beliefs. And so when we have like community centers or powwows events, it helps us, to get together, to know each other and our family. I would say it's different because I grew up in the city, like on the reservation, we still have that cultural practice belief that when someone dies, you have 4 days to take care of them. So people will, not work. They'll shut down the government down there. They'll take that seriously. And here in the city, I have to say, well, I can't show up to the last day, the 4th day for the wake. I can't, be there for the full ceremony, and that's kind of like a balance that I have to learn, because in the city, if I don't go to work or school, I'll fail. They don't understand that in my culture, I need to be there with the family and the body. And so, dealing with that balance of life and learning to accept a lot of things. But as a Native American, I still have to maintain the health of my spirituality, and the city can give me drain from that. So I think when it comes to colonization, I think I really have to protect my spirituality with colonization, living in the city.
I would say that all of my beliefs around transformative justice, restorative justice, accountability, connection are all rooted in Indigenous ways of being and ways of knowing, and also Black feminist thought, which essentially just recognizes the central and centers Black women's lived experience and the ways in which we move through the world. And I think what is both distinct and important about both of those as not only like pedagogical frameworks, right, but like as what is the core of how I move through the world, is that they're both rooted in connection. And so my fundamental belief is that this connection is the root of all evil, right? When we don't feel connected to the land we're on, to the people that we're with, to ourselves, to the work that we do, to the food that we eat, we don't feel accountable to those things, which then allows us to harm ourselves, allows us to harm one another, allows us to harm our environment. Because once you feel that connection, you feel obligated to care, right? And so I think about the Indigenous communities that I have been able to be a part of, and I think about my own Indigenous community in Nigeria, and what is at the core of it is just understanding that we are connected to one another. We are connected to this place that we occupy in time and space. And if that is what it means to be a human moving through this world, to be in this place of connection, then how do we operate from that place? How do we make decisions, understanding what our connection is to one another? And so that is how I have come to know and talk about these things, because of what I've talked about with other Black women, what I've read about from Black women and Indigenous folks, and what I've learned from being in community with those people.
I have chills, Ozy. That was beautiful. I think that's always like a reminder, because it's when you can identify with others in that sense of feeling connected in that way. It's like, how could I hurt you like that when we are like one like that? We are the lowest together, like we will never be, we have to continue to uplift those who are at the lowest parts of our society. Thank you for that. Okay, I know we've been talking a lot about personal accountability and those in our community, but we're going to kind of start zooming out to that macro level okay, so we are told to call the police and rely on the criminal justice system to address violence within our communities. However, if police and prisons facilitate or perpetuate violence against us rather than increase our safety, how do we create strategies to address violence within our communities, including domestic violence, sexual violence, and child abuse that don't rely on police or prisons? That's a big question that came from the Omaha Abolition Research Group, which we had some conversations about what this conversation would look like. So thank you, shout out to them, and I can't wait to hear what you guys have to say about this. Was that a lot? Do I need to repeat the?
They just need someone needs an ass whooping. That's what it means. That's what it means. With that, I guess, you know, with Native Americans, because like we have a high rate of murder and missing Indigenous women in this continent, South America, North America, and Canada, right? And one of the accountabilities that I'm preaching, that I got black sheep again, is that a lot of this, yes, with the pipelines that are coming through with the man camps, yes, and then with the jurisdiction laws and reservation and from state, you know, you could do criminal jurisdiction and won't follow you. But another one is that our Native men are the ones abusing women, our Native women. They're the ones that I had, like, we just had a few on my own reservation, and I think 2 of them so far, one of the deaths was from their own boyfriend. And then another death like is in question, and another woman's missing. There's some Native women on my own reservation, and it has to stimulate with their boyfriend. So the accountability with that is that, like, from the reservation point, when people get on council, you know, it's almost nothing we're all related somehow or another, right? So it's easy for people to like look the other way when their relative is hurting someone. And here in the city, it's the same way. It's just easier to, from what I noticed growing up, is just that it's this mentality that the the Native community will blame the victim and not the victor, and they will uphold the Native man that's been, you know, abusing. So that's one thing I'm trying to work on, is to tackle that. I want to work on doing, like, having Native men heal themselves. Like, Native men needs to, that's my big thing. The Native men needs to learn to heal themselves. They need to learn that it's not okay to hit and hurt their partner. And so that's what I see accountability. That is that, you know, we have to find a way for Native men to like heal. There's got to be a way for Native men to heal, because that's the main part of the epidemic of murder and missing Indigenous women. And I don't know, just be more advocate, I guess. And also with the state, you know, when I'm seeing this hashtag Save the Children. I haven't really like I've been out in the countries, like in the woods, so I haven't really know what the hashtag. I'm thinking it's like, what is it about? When kids go in the system and they go missing? Is that what it is?
It's a whole nother can of worms. I'm telling you, we can talk about
well,
it.
Anyway,
It's a whole nother thing, but yeah.
Historically, Native Americans have been taken away and sold in the system and missing and sold off to sex trade. It's horrible, and it creates a term called split feather, where Natives that are taken away and raised in white families, and they come back to the culture because they're not seen as white because they're not white. It's not accepted there, but they're not accepted back in Native culture because they don't know nothing about their culture. And so in the 70s, they created ICWA with a federal law that's supposed to stop that. They're supposed to, like, okay, let's try to get you back to your family. If we can't get back to your family, then go to a foster home or a Native family or some kind of Native community. In Nebraska ignored that federal law for years. Actually, a lot of states ignored that federal law for years. And so that's another issue, is like, you know, how do we protect the children without getting the CPS involved? Because historically, the CPS has stolen our Native children, you know? I mentioned that 2012, you know, in a news conference. I said, you know, historically, you know, you guys broke the law, ignored it, stole our Native children in foster care system. You know, you guys make millions each year off of white clay. And then I said, you know, Nebraska, it comes to the conclusion, Nebraska hates Indians. And I remember that was very big controversy, but I said it, and I still say it, Nebraska hates Indians, not in the form like, you know, all these white people hate us. Is a systematic racism, systematic oppression that hates us, the way everything's set up against Native Americans in Nebraska. So that's why I say Nebraska hates Indians. And so, you know, how do we create that space, that the non-judgmental space, that if you're having stress and can't, you know, manage your kids, where do you go? Where do you go for help of domestic violence that you feel safe, you know, when we haven't really addressed these issues in our culture? Like I said, it's just when I mentioned that, you know, I got black sheep, you know, because people don't want to admit that their sons or grandsons or their brothers or uncles or dads are beating our own Native women. Like people, like I said, people don't want to be accountable to the truth about that. And so it's still like, you know, how do we create community spaces where it's not going to be non-judgmental, but yet you could get help for these problems.
Mm-hmm. And Ozy, I remember when you and I were talking, you even brought up the fact that like even in social work, there's racism. And so it's like, yes, we want to defund the police and move money over to these other resources, but at the same time, are we teaching those other departments anti-racism theory and what that looks like in their own niche of work?
Riley, do you want to go first before I jump in? I know you didn't get to answer that last question.
Oh,
Thank you,
that
Ozy.
wasn't a question for me anyway. That was none of my business. But I'll just real quickly. I think when we talk about
Come back.
how do we kind of look after ourselves, is that right? I'm sorry, it keeps freezing. How do we look after ourselves in our communities rather than calling police in? Was that right?
Mm-hmm.
I think what we need to do is first kind of recognize who is our community, right? So here in Omaha, I think it's easy to say like, is the community everyone in Omaha? Because I don't know that it is. So really your community are the people who care about you, right? So I know it's sometimes referred to as a micro community. So these are the people who actually care about the individual, who does harm and who is harmed, and it actually cares for how we address the harm that was done, both to the person who's been harmed, the person who caused the harm, and then to the harm that's been caused to the community as a whole. So when we talk about not calling the police, I think it's important that we are talking about that in the context of abolition, and that we're saying the police are what people use right now because they don't really have any other way. But the reality is that police are reactionary, right? They don't actually prevent crime from happening. What was mentioned here, domestic violence, sexual violence, child abuse. Whenever police are brought into those situations, it's almost always after the fact, right? It's very rarely do they intervene. They can if they get there in time, but generally it's after the fact, right? And so just a couple numbers real quickly. These are the clearance rates of crimes from the FBI from 2017. So the amount of crimes that go unsolved, it really is what it is. Murder is 38.4%, aggravated assault 46.7%, rape 65.5%, robbery 70%, larceny theft 80%, motor vehicle theft 86%, burglary 86.5%. The reason I mention that is because we can't solve the harm that was done from all those crimes because our system doesn't do that. I think Ozy mentioned that earlier. The system that we currently have does not address harm. It just addresses how do we create punishment for victims. Well, if all those crimes that I just mentioned, all those high percentages are going unsolved, if they don't find somebody to arrest for that, they don't do anything. The police tell you, as Maria has heard on the phone, sorry, can't help you. So far too often, I think we rely on a system that is reactionary and doesn't actually do anything to actually address the harm.
Yeah, I got 2 more things. So I just want to think, like I said, how do we create that safe space? And I just thought about my grandmother. So my grandma, like I said, she was a community leader. But another thing, a lot of people called her mom, and it was from all different races because she created that space growing up that she had to create a space if kids didn't feel safe at their home or if they wasn't getting enough to eat, they would go to her and she lets them in. So like, how do we create that space again? Because like I said, there's a lot of people to this day that called her mom, and there was not only Native Americans but different races. She had created that space instead of like calling the police and CPS. For the kids, like she created a safe space for them to be welcome and taken care of. And so I think about that. How do we create that space again? Another one was Educare. It's Head Start, early Head Start, but I like their model because they work with families that have struggled with CPS cases, domestic violence. And with Educare, their number one model is not to get the legal system involved. Let's try to work with these families, And so I think about, we need more social services programs with that, unless the kids are like extremely in danger or the woman or the partner is extremely in danger, we shouldn't get them involved because we know the negative reaction. Then we needed more like social worker in the police, like they need to be trained, like, how do we handle this matter. Um, it's like I said, we need to create that safe space again. Like I said, my grandmother had that growing up. Like I said, people come over called her mom because she gave them that safe space.
Ozy?
Yeah, so I have a ton of thoughts here. So I wanted to make sure that because this is the age-old question, right? It's like, well, if we get rid of the police and we get rid of prisons, like, what will people do? And going back to, well, first off, prisons and police were not meant to really to intervene in harm, right? Prisons were a reform project to move away from really gross capital punishment that was happening. Police came before slave patrols, but that was a large part of what they did. And so it's always been whose safety were they meant to ensure in general. But even beyond that, I think the easiest question or the easiest answer to that comes from this idea that we have to, in order to be able to not have police, to not have whatever, and to have harm be remedied, we have to build a society that doesn't need those things, which means we have to redistribute power, we have to redistribute income, we have to ensure that people feel a sense of community, because people are okay with other people going to prison because they don't see themselves in them, right? If we don't see ourselves in the people that we are in community with, whether that is the people in our neighborhood or the people within our city, we can't actually help those people rehabilitate when they do cause harm. And so we have to see people, one, as individuals that we are in community with who have done things that have caused harm instead of criminals or instead of what have you, because the fact that we have a population of people who can be considered inmates, who can be considered criminals, says that we need a society that doesn't allow those kinds of people to exist, because we have done the work to ensure that people aren't positioned to have to create crime, right? If we have access to affordable housing, if we have access to transportation, if we have access to mental health, if we have access to education, we have a society where people aren't then being positioned in these circumstances that result in crime occurring, quote unquote, or harm occurring. But if we have those communities where people can rehabilitate when they do create harm, when they do these things, that makes it different. We also have to think about, I think, what our definition of violence actually is. Kiese Layman has a quote, and it's like, when you don't care about other people feeling pain, I'm wondering if you are being a violent person. And so I think about that, because when we don't care about if people in our communities are feeling pain, are we not being violent people? And if people in our community are living in poverty, if people in our community aren't having access to resources, that's a different kind of violence that we allow to exist. And so it's also, how are we defining violence? And if we are not responding to all forms of violence, then one kind of particular violence can manifest in ways that only disproportionately impact already marginalized people, which are communities of color, which are poor people, which are queer people, which are all of those things. And so it's thinking about, one, how we're naming violence, two, how we have to create a society where people have access to the things they need so that they don't have to turn to these alternatives. And if we are having a system that replaces our current carceral system, whether it is a punishment system or a rehabilitation system, it can't just be one kind of system. We have to move away from this idea that this one alternative is going to replace this alternative. It's going to be a myriad of alternatives, and those alternatives, to the point what you were saying, Maria, they have to be rooted in anti-racism. They have to be rooted in anti-homophobia, anti-transphobia, anti-ableism, all of those things at their core, and they all must work together in order for that to be possible, which does sound really big in all of those things, but that's what has to happen in order for a societal shift to occur. And I think it's possible because we landed here, right? Society didn't start like this. Indigenous communities didn't start like this, but it took years, 500 years or so, to cement this new way of being. And so we can re-cement a different way of being if we commit ourselves to those things. And so that's what it looks like to create a place that doesn't rely on police or prisons, is to redistribute, is to center community, to create communities where people can see themselves in one another and all of those things.
And like when we're talking about community, it just like makes me think about how many people specifically in the suburbs know their neighbors. And then it makes me think about like sprawling suburbanism and people having their long ass driveways and not, anyhow, I could totally get into that because it's bringing up other nightcaps that I've had. Anyhow, we have another question from the stream. What concrete steps can we take to not only create a culture of community, accountability, and transformative justice, but to reduce the scope and reach of punitive and carceral systems?
I want to work on like they call it justice reform. I don't understand our correction. I just want to work on how, because when you look at Native Americans, like we have a high population in prison and in jail. Like how can I help them to cognitively think, to be creative thinking? Like, because once they get out, they just go back to their same thinking and how to survive, because like, we have a lot of visible barriers. Like how do we tackle these invisible barriers to help them create a better life, or a life where they don't have to reduce to crime, And so I want more supportive services for that, for Native Americans to like, hey, let's not definitely call reoffending. Let's not reoffend again. Let's look at this. What barriers do you have? How can we help you? How can we work through this? And it's, and it's hard when you already have a felony, So how do we create job opportunities for felons? How do we create learning work skills for felons? How do we create that safe space for felons to work on themselves, that they don't, because when they go to prison, it seems like it just makes it worse for them. It doesn't help them anything. It just makes them worse. And how do we unwire that thinking and mentality that they have to survive in prison? Because it's all a survival mechanism when you're on that other side. So how do we meet them at their level to help them get, to become to grow as a person, not just the label of their felonies, not just a victim of their past. Like, how do we help you heal and grow, so we can keep our people out of the prison system? Especially in the state of Nebraska, they just make money off of us. Like, just want, you could help with these programs, but they want to fund the prison system, and it's, it's like it's a setup.
Yeah, it makes me think, like when you mentioned, I forgot who it was, but that designed the license plate. I'm like, oh, but most Nebraska license plate are made from prison labor. Mm-hmm. So then what? Sorry, that's just my little thought process there. Riley, what do you think are like some good concrete steps that people can take? Because we do see a lot of people, and you've witnessed it, out protesting, and that's all good, but it's only one piece of the puzzle of holding people accountable. So what do you see past protesting that people can do to hold people in the community and elected officials accountable?
Yeah, so I don't know if the question that was written, but the second part of that question that came through the stream, do you have that in front of you, Maria? Could you just
reread it?
That second part? Yeah.
Okay. What concrete steps can we take to not only create a culture of community, accountability, and transformative justice, but to reduce the scope and reach of punitive and carceral systems?
Okay, that's great. Thank you. So I just there's 4 points here, and I got this from Dean Spade of Critical Resistance. If you're not familiar with Critical Resistance, please follow them online. They are great. But one of the things that he talks about is assessing reforms to the system, right? So we have reformist reforms and we have abolitionist reforms. So it's really important, as we talk about like what steps can we take to work towards a abolitionist framework, that we're making sure that we're not doing a couple of things and we are doing a couple others. So I'll run through these real quickly, but one, does the reform provide material relief? So for instance, if the police are saying we need money so we can throw a community barbecue because that's good for people. Like if you want to throw a barbecue, like give money to like a community organization to throw a barbecue. You don't need to give money to the police for that. So that's one. Number 2, does it leave out an especially marginalized part of the affected group, which creates a quote deserving and quote undeserving group? So that's important because I think often within the criminal justice system, what we see is we say, well, yeah, that's great. Restorative justice is great for these people, but not these people. Or we can do this for somebody with this kind of offense, but if it's a gang member, then we can't do it. So what we need to do is make sure that we're not creating these reforms that have a deserving and undeserving group within the reforms, right? 3, does it legitimize or expand a system that we're trying to dismantle? That's a huge one. That's one that we see all the time. So when we talk about police overview, police boards, or citizen review boards or whatever, are we not just creating a system that, or are we not adding to a system that legitimizes the system in the first place? Because if we're saying the community can just create a board which looks over the police, then we're saying the police are in and of themselves legitimate, and we're trying to say they don't have legitimacy in our communities, because we should be able to work within ourselves to do that. And lastly,
we're like still policing each other.
Yeah, and it's a little bit different. I know we use the term policing each other, but I think it's more holding to each other accountable, right? I mean, to the point of this whole thing, we're not really policing. I kind of view as there's a superior and inferior group. There's a tier system, right? Accountability can be on the same plane. And then the last one here, real quickly, does how we are winning these reforms, does it mobilize the most affected, or the most affected in the ongoing struggle? So essentially, are we engaging the people that are most affected in these changes, right? So if we have white-led groups that are leading white people to do all this work, are we actually bringing in the people who are most affected by these racist institutions, racist systems? Are we doing that? Because if we're not, then we're probably leading people astray a little bit. So those are the 4 things I think are good questions to ask yourself as you're talking about reforms for changing the system.
Yeah, kind of like what Mechelle was saying, going back to like that white saviorism. If you're not including and working for the Black and Indigenous and brown folks that's voices need to be raised. Ozy, what do you think? What are you thinking over there?
Yeah, I think there's a ton of things, right? Where it's like, again, going from the micro to the macro to the meso level, or in between all 3. One, the distinction, I heard Kay from AIDS Abolition speak the other day in a webinar, and they said they made a really good delineation between what restorative justice is and what transformative justice is. Restorative justice being, how do we repair a relationship, right? How do we return to a right or place in a specific relationship and restore a relationship back to its original state? Transformative justice, recognizing that some people's original state is a place of harm. So how do we move a system or move a society so that original state can be remedied? And so thinking through it from that lens, and thinking through the fact that the prisons aren't a place where people go because they're bad. It's a place where people go when they're poor. Prisons, when we have made it a habit of criminalizing communities of color, when we have made it a habit of criminalizing specific groups of people, we have to think about what we can do to undo the criminalization of those specific peoples, which then means doing those things within our disciplines, within our professions, to challenge the ways in which certain groups are disproportionately disadvantaged, where certain groups are not having access to all of these things, right? So it's changing, one, the ways in which we are able to criminalize people, the ways in which we are able to deem people as acceptable or unacceptable, which feels very large and very abstract, but that's how we get to this place where people can end up in these places, is because we haven't done enough work within the education system, we haven't done enough work within the healthcare system, we haven't done enough work within the housing system to make sure that certain people aren't being disproportionately disadvantaged and having to do things that then can be criminalized, because we've criminalized poverty, because we've criminalized their identities. The other piece is investing in strategies that we are seeing that are effective, right? We know that collectives are important for communities and can do a lot of work to informally act as, like, not official citizen oversight boards, but do a better job of keeping a pulse on what's happening in the community, so that when, for instance, violence is happening, there can be a community-led response to that. So it's investing in communities and community efforts to create alternative spaces of reprieve, alternative spaces of rehabilitation, and all of those things. But it's also then going back to the piece about accountability not being punitive, and the idea that we have to make it desirable for other people to come into our accountability, what that desirability looks like is different, right? When it comes to politicians, how do we make it quote unquote desirable so that they can't help but be accountable to us? And that's using our vote. It's using all of these different strategic things to ensure that they want to do the thing that we want them to do, because we have made it so they can't see themselves being able to do their job without being accountable to us. And so being strategic in how we push things forward, how we challenge our representatives and all of those things, but also looking at other models, right? Denver is doing the STAR program right now to have an alternative for 911 calls. Oakland is doing work, Portland is doing work, looking at how different communities have been trying these alternatives and have been struggling towards this thing, and being willing to fall forward and coming up with these alternatives, and not letting the vastness of it stop us from trying at least those small things, whether that is challenging anti-racism within our organization, or that is trying to pilot a new program where people are calling this line instead of calling the police. But being strategic and trying to penetrate it, I think at every level is important.
And if I could just add on that real quick, because that last point at the end was so perfect. I think it's so easy to fall into this idea that how do we know this is going to work, or what if this fails? I'm telling you, people, we have to do this together as a community. It's going to take everybody. No one person has a silver bullet for it. And remember every single day that this criminal justice system fails us every single day. So do not be afraid to fail as you try to find the solutions to these big process system that's failing us every day.
I'm so glad you're all here with me. Oh my gosh. And I hate that it's 9:30 because I feel like I have like 3 more questions that I want to ask. So let me think about what I want to finish with. Okay. Kind of what Ozy said. I do want to talk about people who are running for office, because there's so many people right now at the local level, at the state level. I'm not going to name names, but we all know who they are. And presidential level, who have said sexist, homophobic, racist things, but yet we are being put in a position where they may be our only option to vote for. And so what does it look like to hold them accountable, so that we can start rebuilding that trust that's completely been broken because of what has been said XYZ 1,000 amount of times? I won't go rant, so somebody else, please.
Well, I was very heartbroken when Bernie dropped out. I cried. I literally cried because I was working on his campaign low key. Like, I was out there helping with some Native issues. I was helping with the very first Native American Presidential Forum, Candidacy Forum. And so I tackled him to come there. I was helping on some of his issues. He had the very first climate crisis summit out of all the politicians. And so he invited me to come speak to that and be a guest speaker to that. And so, like, yeah, I cried. I broke down and cried because, you know, even though as a politician leader and for the Democratic Party as the Native Caucus chair, you know, I still, like, it's like the part, like I said, being accountable to these politicians. Like, you know, I'm still trying to figure out tactics, like how to, you know, make Joe Biden accountable for like his stuff he's doing. Like, even now with the Native Americans, like, he never showed up to the Native American Presidential Forum. Like, I tried to invite him twice and he didn't show up. And I still want to hold him accountable for Standing Rock. He had the chance, him and Obama, to stop Standing Rock, and they took forever, you know? And they really didn't stop it because then Trump came in and just did what they did. And it's like, you know, as a leader, you know, I am going to hold him accountable. But also as my party, you know, they want me to back him up because he's a Democrat. And the only reason why I'm doing this is because Uncle Bernie, as we call him, said, Uncle Bernie said to back him up because we need to take out Trump. And so, yeah, I'm working on that. I'm working on connectors to be like, you know, we need to, like, right now he has like a Native American policy candidacy forum that they're a group that are working on that. And I need to check in with that to see, because I wanted to add like urban Native policy. Because like being a Native American here, you know, a lot of the like help or things that people believe that we have free education, all that stuff, you know, a lot of that has to do with the reservation. Like, you know, when we're here in the city, you know, we don't get that help. We're just like everyone else. So I want to make sure that he he has more to put that in the policy to help more urban natives, because half of us percentage of Native Americans are in the city now. And I was like, we need that help, and we need those services, and we needed a way to get out of poverty as well. So yeah, it is hard because, you know, the whole party is basically backing him up, and me being like I said, I'm an activist first. Like it's like, oh, it's just like, but the best way I can use my voice is on that platform of like, hey, this is what the natives need. You know, you need to like listen to us. And like I told people before, like these, even though they're elected leaders and they may be leaders of a different party, they're still elected leaders. You have every right to go down there to their office. You have every right to protest and demand. I do it all the time since I live in the city, our state capital, so I'll be going down there. Well, not since the COVID. I'm like, I'm staying away, but you know, I do it all the time. Like, hey, you know, you're working on this issue here. You need to listen to my voice, and then that's what it is like holding these them accountable, especially with like his allegations, and even Kamala Harris. You know, everybody wants me to back her up, but like she, you know, she disrespected Chairman Fraser at a Native American forum. You know, and it's like, you know, she's not very how would I say, culturally educated on Native Americans, you know, and I think that's the sad thing about us Native Americans. Like we're the last, like, you know, our group was always, we're the minorities of the minorities, you know, and we're always ignored. Our voices are never gonna heard. So that's why, you know, the belief I say, you know, they're never gonna invite me to the table, so I gotta bring my own chair and show up, you know, and that's what we gotta do, because essentially we don't want Trump to win again for all the reasons why, but we need to make sure our elected leaders are accountable. And another way to do that is to run for office yourself. You know, a lot of these politicians are way out of touch, and we need people that have experience or living this to run for office. That's why I ran for office 2 years ago, and I'll probably run again here when it comes back. Yep.
Do it. Let us know how we can help you.
Thank you.
I'll echo that, because it's yes, to Michelle's point, it is about running for office. It's about more access to training around civic engagement and how to run for office so that people find that that is a viable option for them and they can find the support they need if they choose to campaign. But it's also, how do we exercise our civic rights, our civic whatever, to ensure that accountability isn't this thing that can be taken for granted, but is integral for whoever is empowered, for them to be in power. I think back to a lot of the civil rights movements, how a lot of them hinged on hitting the US dollar, right? Because they knew that in order for any kind of accountability to the movement to occur, they had to make it as desirable for the person in power as possible. What's not desirable? Losing money each day when people aren't riding your buses. And so if that's the case, you're going to move to do something to make it better for the people who are using their bodies, who are using whatever to push this thing in this different direction. And so what can you do? What can we do to ensure that, one, accountability isn't this thing that can be taken for granted, but is actually what everything that you're doing kind of hinges on, and being able to use your power. So recognizing the power that you have to be able to ensure that, and being willing to do so, I think is important. And the piece about, I could go on about the election and all of those things, but at the end of the day, when it comes to that, is who are you accountable to in that process? Are you accountable to this electoral process? Are you accountable to the communities that will disproportionately be impacted by one decision or the other? Or are you accountable to your beliefs and to your values? And that isn't a decision that I can make for anyone else. That is who you are. That is your thing. I know who I am and how I move through the world and what decisions I will make, but I am not going to condemn someone because of where their accountabilities lie and how that impacts the decisions that they make in that kind of way. So I think that last part of the question around, do we trust people and vote for them, is tricky. And it comes down to, what are you at the end of the day fighting for? And if at the end of the day, this decision will help move whatever you're fighting for and who you're accountable, it'll protect them, then do that. And if not, then that's not the decision that I think that you need to make.
Riley, any thoughts?
Yeah, I'll just be real quick here. I think both Mechelle and Ozy's points were great. But I'll just say on the political thing, don't be afraid to primary people. And I say that as speaking probably to a majority of Democrats here, I think there is way too often this urge to just like, if they got a D next to their name, I guess I'm a fan. And we really got to stop that, because that's not holding people accountable. Because you're not, if you just stop your criticisms because you see a D and you start your criticisms because you see an R, we're going to be running this same gamut for years, decades, forever. We got to stop that, right? And also, again, I'm not going to name any names, but we don't need to wait for the leader of the Democratic Party to tell us, oh, this person's bad, now you can, this Democrat's bad, now you can say whatever you want about them. If someone is doing something wrong, call them out and find people and hold them accountable. And if it means running against them, then do that. I promise you, in this city, there are tons of people who are fed up with a lot of politicians locally here and would love to see some people get in. And also, you don't have to have certain qualifications to run. We need more working people in these positions. I cannot stress that enough. We need more regular working people. Quite honestly, we have enough lawyers. Quite honestly, we have enough people that come from that background who have not shown any type of compassion or willingness to want to work for regular people. So please, I don't care what your background is. Like, if you care about the people and you can create a movement and do the right thing, just please consider it. So that's all I have.
I want to just take off Riley. Like, I feel like my Democratic Party doesn't have street smarts, because like there's one candidate in the news, and like 2 years ago I was telling him, like, dude, I don't like this dude. I really don't like him, man. And I pointed out his bad character defects, and everybody's like, oh, Mechelle. I was like, no. I was like, you guys need to start listening to me when I said this person, just because they say they're running as a Democrat, they do not have these values that we're looking for. And so I wish the Democrat Party would start listening to me more. And if I told them when all that broke out, I was like, see, you guys should start listening to me more, because I told you guys 2 years ago that this is a bad person and nobody wanted to hear it.
Yeah, we could have a whole nother night caps on just like the bipartisan system that we live in. Oh my gosh. Okay, last question. I want to end it on like a more positive note before Ozy takes the main stage. But what do you think healing and repair looks like in your work on a micro and macro level that we can learn from and take from tonight on into our own activism work? Yeah, that's it.
Anybody? Okay, I'll go. Okay, so personal level, sometimes I need to learn to like rest. There's a lot of issues. I remember, when I got involved with the party 4 years ago, everybody wanted me at this event, and this event, and they wore me out. I was like, dude, I need to focus on my thing. I want to be supported as much as I can. So like, personally, you have to take that time out, because it does, people that say negative things about you. And like right now, there's this thing going on. I noticed that other activists are trying to say, well, you're not activist enough, or you're not real enough to, do this and that. And like, we need to stop that, because like I said, like I've been doing this for many years, and I can say the same thing about you. You're just jumping in now. Like, what are you doing? I don't, and there's the things like, either I support you or I don't, if I show up or not. And, on the bigger level, like, one of the things is like, you need to learn to take your losses, because it takes before we get the win, it takes a lot of losses, and that was from a big lesson from helping Dr. Frank Lemire shut down White Clay. That took him over 20 years. And it was like a lot of discouragement a lot of times, but, we just kept pushing forward because it's the right thing to do. And so right now, currently with the Bear Hills, Zachary Bear Hills being killed, I was on it the first, I was on it the first night. Dr. Frank Lemire called me. He said, this is what happened. I really wanted to rally and protest, but he had a relationship with the chief of police. And that's the other thing that kind of irks me, is that a lot of people that are jumping in on this Bear Hills case now, when they should have jumped in when it happened, doesn't know the whole full story. The only one that was helping us was the chief of police. He fired them officers. But through our justice system and the police union, they got them, off the murder charges and got them back in the police station, right? But he was the only one that was helping us. Another issue was like, I heard from, like, I was doing community meetings to try to help the community process this. We had people trained that's what they do. They go into other communities Native communities, especially that are killed by cops, and train and help them with that, right? So I was giving that services because, I already heard that his mother had a lawsuit going on, right? And she didn't want us interfering with that lawsuit. So out of respect, I didn't interfere with that lawsuit. I did the best I could, and I got like criticized from a lot of leaders, like, well, you're not doing enough. You're not doing, what you should be doing. And look, it came out in the news. She got a settlement of over 500 grand for her son. Yes, that does not bring justice because he was murdered, but I was trying to create community conversations, like, how do we tackle on this? How do we learn for this? How do we grow? How do we protect each other? And I think that's still an issue that we should still be fighting for, is to make sure another murder of a Native American should never happen again. And so it's, like I said, it's very hard for me to like recover from that, knowing what I knew, and none of the like other community leaders want to listen to me, like, hey, this is what's going on, and we should try this tactic. And it hurts. It's a loss. It's loss. And it hurts now that everybody want to jump on the boat way too late after the fact. But because of his mother having that lawsuit, there was only so much I can do.
I think that's really important to note too, is that yes, when we feel angry and we want to rally around something, are we first listening to what the needs are of the person who was hurt in that position? Just another thought there. Riley, what does healing and repair look like in your work as a future lawyer?
So I would like to be a public defender. That's what I aspire to be. But I understand, like, on the micro level, for what I would like to do in the future as a public defender. I want to do that work because I think any day I can get someone out of prison is a good day, because no one belongs there. But I also understand that that alone is not going to heal the problems that created, the reason that they were, having to go to court in the first place, right? And that kind of goes back to the point I made earlier tonight, which was about, we just have a system that is adversarial in nature. So what we're asking is people who are going through the justice system to do is to defend themselves. So you're automatically creating an environment where you're asking someone to be defensive and not take accountability for their actions, right? So that's part of the very problem with our system, is that if we had a different system that actually says, no, we don't want you to defend yourself. We want you to acknowledge what you've done, and we want you to try the best you can to make amends with the person or people that you've harmed, right? So in what I do, I acknowledge that I'm trying to, it's really harm reduction, right? As a public defender, we're just trying to reduce additional harm and trauma to individuals by putting them into prison, but also understanding that that's not enough. So that's on the micro level. On the macro level, that's where it goes right back to, working towards PIC abolition. What we have to do is we need to say, what problems do we see individuals doing, who is being harmed by it, both the individual and then on the community level, and then how do we address that? And there is nobody on this call tonight can give you all the answers to that, because that's going to be determined by the community, right? So that's going to look different in Omaha than it might look in LA, than it might look in Hastings, Nebraska, than it might look in Portland or Miami, right? Because it's going to be up to those individuals. And I think for a lot of people, like, that's why they don't want to do this work, because it's work, it's hard, it takes everybody. We have to have education involved in healthcare and housing and all these different mental health and so many different things, right? So, so often when you hear someone come to you and say, well, then what's the answer? Understand that question is loaded right there, right? Because they're asking you to give a community's worth of answers from one person. And that's just not possible, because it's not any one person's job. It's all of our job to do, right? So, that on the micro level, I think that's kind of how I look at it.
We're going to call you Riley, the public accountability holder. Ozy, how about you? I know you kind of started the Palm Wine Collective, but what else does healing look like in your work that you do?
Yeah, so that is the work that I do. I'm a macro social worker, and basically what I do is I look for how do we heal from the harm that is caused by white supremacy, right? Because we have all been socialized in white supremacy, which means we all need to heal from it. And that's not, I think, in my humble opinion, not centered enough when it comes to doing racial equity work. Is, yeah, we're deconstructing white supremacy, we're doing all of these things, but how are we repairing the harm that those things caused? And how can we more intentionally do that as we are working to deconstruct, as we are unlearning, as we're doing all of those things? And so, like, on a very micro/meso level, that's holding racial healing circles for my work at Denver Public Library. It's creating space for people to have real and honest and frank conversations around what it means to be a racialized person, what it means to unlearn how they maybe negatively viewed other people in the world. It's creating resources for folks of color to access mental health resources, to access culturally responsive resources, to deal with the harms that come from existing and working in racialized environments, right? So it's one, creating space for people to heal, because we are accountable to our actions, we are accountable to our words, but we're also accountable to our healing. And so it's making sure that, one, we all know that we need to be healing. Two, making sure that people have access to healing that meets their needs and responds to the core of the things that they need to work through. But it is also on a macro level. It's changing systems and professions by, one, recognizing the harm that we've caused. And so really taking, for instance, I work in the field of public health, I work in social work, and I work in public libraries, right? And so all of these institutions are all tasked with serving the public good. They are public institutions serving the people, right? And so it's like, how have these systems, how have these industries actually perpetuated harm? And how do we, one, first reckon with that, so that we know the ways in which we have played a role in a lot of the disproportionalities that we see, and a lot of the people that end up in prisons and jails and all of those things. And once we understand what we've done to contribute, how do we undo those things and create new policies, new procedures, new processes, so that that harm can't occur again? And so it's, yes, it's training the social workers so that they have a culturally responsive anti-racist praxis. It's training librarians in the same kind of way. It's making sure that we're creating new professions, new things, then that can actually be centered around healing. So bringing healing into all of the professional work that I'm doing on a micro, meso, and macro level is really important to me. So I'm always talking about healing in my work.
I love it. All you guys have so much knowledge, and thank you so much for sharing it with all of us. I like to always try to have action steps for people to take. And mine is send your notes to all of your representatives from tonight, and what that looks like, that how you're going to hold yourself accountable in ways they can hold themselves accountable, and how we're going to hold them accountable as a community, and what that looks like here in Omaha, in Denver, in California, wherever you are tonight. Email a representative, send them a letter, buy some postage stamps, anything you can do to take this conversation into your own communities, because I don't want this to stop here. This is the start of talking about it, but we need to continue to practice it in our everyday lives. And so I really, really hope that you learned something. I learned a lot. I hope you guys on the panel all learned something from each other. And we just continue to keep talking about this and being open to being held accountable ourselves. I think it's just like where we have to start, because like I think each and every one of us has mentioned that we're only accountable for our own selves. And while we can invite people to that table of accountability, at the end of the day, it's all on our interpersonal work. So with that being said, the last thing, if you've been watching this and if you enjoyed it, please consider donating to the donation stream on the Outer Spaces website. And with that, Ozy, I can't wait to hear some poems from you.
Oh, we'll see. Let me pull up. And to echo that, an actionable item, I think, is, one, having a real conversation with the people that you are closest to community with. Like, what is our accountability plan? When I cause harm or you cause harm, how do we move forward, right? Like, I don't know that a lot of us have had those conversations with our loved ones. We just assume that we'll be able to figure it out when it happens. But unless that plan has been established, unless you have a common ground on where that foundation is, and I don't think that can actually happen. So that, I think, is how we put it in praxis, how we first practice it in our interpersonal relationships before we try and like have accountability over these huge systems, I think. So I am going to be reading some words. I don't really perform poems anymore. because I don't know, there's something about performing pain that costs a lot, that I don't know, it costs too much for me to continue to do too often. But I do read words, right? And I think that's a little bit different because it's just me sharing something that I have written and want to express versus me trying to embody this thing that came in a lot of ways, in a lot of times, from a place of intense emotion or suffering. And so I say that to say, if I read this flat or whatever, I'm sorry. I will do my best to make this as engaging as possible, but I think it's the words that matter the most, versus how I'm reading them. And I know that we're already at 8:54, and so I'll only read a few of them. Which one? This one is a more recent one, and it came from a lot of the grief that I've been feeling and thinking through. And I listened to Adrienne Marie Brown on a podcast around finding joy during the coronavirus. And in it, she talks about how she's like given herself time and space to feel all of the things. She's created a grief practice because we're grieving so much. We're grieving the old ways of doing things. We're grieving being able to be connected to one another in the ways in which we're used to. We're grieving jobs. We're grieving loved ones. We're grieving the loss of familiarity, all of these things, right? And so I've been thinking about what it means to create space to explore what the grief is really revealing to you. Because oftentimes when you really slow it down, grief is a really loud expression of love for the things that we fear losing, love for the things that we've lost, love for ourselves and the things that we hold tight. And so I've been thinking about what it means to grieve as a demonstration of love and what it means to participate in demonstrations of love alongside demonstrations of our anger. Because I was really hesitant to be going to the protest because that takes a lot of energy that I don't have the capacity to give, but I do like being a part of demonstrations of joy, demonstrations of life, and all of those things, which is a long-winded way of saying this came from a vigil that I had attended in Denver a couple weeks ago. And it was a very beautiful vigil to honor murdered at the hands of the police. And right after that, I was reading a book of poems by Dennis Smith, who is a really dope queer Black non-binary poet. And one of their poems says, "Please don't call us dead, call us alive someplace better." And so this is how I will start these words. So this was written after the vigil and read at a demonstration of joy that happened a few weeks later. I'm looking at all of these faces, and I'm reminded that there are still things that are beautiful, that there are still things that are whole and not dead and mine. And I know that should I fall apart, I will land softly, because I have all of these hands to catch me, all of these hands that have been trained to catch for centuries. And haven't we done such a good job of catching ourselves? Haven't we truly mastered the art of crafting magic out of the ugly, of piecing our bruised parts back together, of stitching ourselves whole time after time? No wonder they fear us. We practice resilience so much we don't even think about it. We just flex that muscle instinctively, with such ease, with such beauty, with such grace, with such anger and such fire and such hard-edged grit. But haven't we earned that right? After all that we've survived, and yet we emerge, we fight, we do not die. Even when they kill us, we do not die. George Floyd was murdered, but we will not let them kill his memory. Breonna Taylor was murdered, but we will not let them kill her memory. Nina Pop was murdered, but we will not let them kill her memory. Tony McDade was murdered, but we will not let them kill his memory. James Scurlock was murdered, but we will not let them kill his memory. And so many others have been murdered at the hands of a racist state, but we do not let them die. We tell their stories. We remember the expansiveness of their Black lives, not just their violent deaths. And we wish them more rest than this life ever gave them. Because in some ways, that's the only way we can find to exist beyond the confines of this limited lifespan they grant us. And so we honor their Black beauty and their Black joy, and we pray for their Black healing, for all of our healing. And we do not die, We fight for more. We survive. We live. And should they take our breath away, please don't call us dead. Call us alive someplace better. And again, that last line is a quote from a poem by Dennis Smith. Speaking of poems by Dennis Smith, they also have a book of poems called Homie. And in it, they have a poem about their president. And so this poem, these series of words are about my president. My president is a Black woman. My president is Malaysia Booker and her refusal to give up her right to life, even in death, living much more loudly than most. My president is the woman at the library who greets me with a "Hey, honey," when she sees me. My president likes Encyclopedia Brown, also knows the secret magic of the word bookkeeper. My president is Beyonce's PR manager. My president knows how to protect the secrets that matter, won't protect the secrets that hurt. My president is my grandmother, is my masseuse, is my therapist, is my yoga instructor. My president is a poet. My president knows how to revive bodies with words and breath, with careful intonation. My president can roller skate. Did you see the way her Black body effortlessly glided across the timeline the other day? I had to do a double take, had to double tap, offer double thanks. My president is a baddie. My president stays with the freshest of fades, but you won't ever see her catch one. My president won't ever be caught slipping. My president is sweet, but don't let that sweetness fool you, because my president bites back, because my president has been bitten too many times to turn the other cheek. My president believes in books, but doesn't believe that that's the only place knowledge lives and grows. My president is a scholar. They don't believe in the academy, would burn it to the ground if they could. My president is setting themselves on fire to watch the academy burn. My president is on fire. My president set herself on fire to watch the whole of us burn, knowing that's what would be needed to save us. The holy sacrifice, the whole. My president is a Black woman. Who else would really give a fuck about us? This nation of the neglected, resilient and strong. This nation of the willful, the taking, the wrong. This nation that doesn't deserve her. That would rather kill her before it let her save us all. My president is a Black woman, but I wouldn't blame her if she resigned. My president has every right to be resigned, and yet my president is a Black woman, which is to say she carries on in spite, despite, in light of it all. This poem is taking a little bit direction, this is shifting in a different direction. It's not political, although everything that I do as a Black woman is political because of the ways in which my identities are politicized, which is a whole other thing. But I was thinking about my relationship with God and prayer and how it's taken very different dimensions. I grew up in a very Catholic household, so I first looked to God in the church, and then something shifted and poetry became my prayer, right? I put down my Bible and I started picking up a pen and paper, and I knew that what I needed for my own salvation couldn't be found in a church on folded knees, but turned into journals that turned into prayer books. And that, I think, has really shifted my spirituality in certain ways. And so it's been interesting because I stopped looking for God everywhere, but I did start praying again this year because of all of the things that are happening. I think I just really wanted something to hold on to, but I wasn't praying to these other things. I was trying to think about the ways in which I prayed to myself and the ways in which I am accountable to myself. And so this most recent piece of writing is written when I was brooding over some dude that doesn't matter. I was irritated with myself because I was focusing on this thing in this economy in this precarious point in time. Like, why should I be spending so much energy here? So it's like, do better, Ozy. And this is what sort of came from that. And it's called, Do You Pray to Yourself? Do you pray to yourself? Do you kneel at the altar of your own body? What holy offerings do you leave at your feet? I promise myself that I will not leave myself on the altar of another man who loves the way most of these Western gods do, which is to say, I will not make myself sacrifice some kind of unholy offering. I will not bend myself into something unfamiliar in order to access some small sample of something to ease my loneliness, some little bit of leftover love. I am done with fasting. I'm ready to fill up on something different, something less inherently damned. I will not condemn this longing or alone. I will genuflect and become familiar with it, memorize its many thick dimensions, the same way I know cross to chest. I will turn it into sanctuary, into prayer, into a holier form of redemption. I will learn a new kind of grace and enter a more sacred communion with my own undamned self. And then I will read one last one. Let's see. Actually, do I have time for two or one? Two? Okay. So this other one is an old one, and it's about teaching. I was doing that for a few years in Denver, and a lot of why I am the way that I am is because of the ways in which I feel accountable to not only the children that I was teaching at the time, but to children in general in our education system and what we're leaving behind. And so this is a poem about that. It's a little bit longer, and then I'll end with a shorter one. Through a strange series of events, I've somehow managed to find myself teaching math to middle schoolers in South Denver. And oh, what a journey it's been. See, my students deal with the kind of stuff that makes the news headlines, the kind of stuff that would trend on Twitter if people really cared. My job is to make sure that they know how to convert fractions to decimals, to ensure they know how to calculate area and perimeter. Don't wear red, don't wear blue, don't wear anything inflammatory, stick to neutrals. These kids might not know what love looks like. You'll have to teach them. Sometimes I'm more backbone than teacher, and that's okay. I can wear many hats. My kids get angry, they scream, they cuss, they cry, and I tell them, this doesn't make you bad or unworthy of love. This makes you human. So many of them have never heard that before. I tell them, you can throw my chairs and cuss me out, but I will not lower my expectations or belief in you. Why do you care, miss? Why do you care, miss? Why do you care? Miss. Every kid doesn't make it through, though, which we lose students like children lose baby teeth, which is to say they fall out and fall off, and we don't always know what to do with them. We forget about them, and they end up in the box of forgotten items, lost in a register that only knows them as a printed name. I know middle schoolers with rap sheets longer than the list of places they've been to, longer than the list of people who have told them they believed in them, longer than the list of dreams they have for themselves. And as educators, we're told not to pick favorites. And don't get me wrong, all of my students are my babies. Each and every one of those knuckle-headed weirdos fills me with joy. There's one kid that deeply changed me. A pint-sized bag of aggression and disbelief. He was nothing short of difficult. I showered him with all the love inside me and greeted him every single time I saw him. Sometimes it'd be 20 times a day. Miss, why do you always get so happy when you see me? Why do you always shout my name in the hallway? What I wanted to say was, because I love you so much, I'll say it every day until you believe me. What I actually said was, because I care. I was set to present him his 8th grade diploma. I had a speech prepared and everything, but he stopped showing up to school, and come graduation day, I never saw him. I had another student that made me more irritated than any child has ever made me. He was sharp-witted and full of such spice, but I cared about him deeply. And I'm ashamed to admit how long it took me to realize just how much he changed me. And now he is dead because of systemic inequities I've learned and theorized about in hollow classrooms. And I know that my understanding of what transpired doesn't really do justice to the totality of his short-lived life, and yet I still somehow have to make sense of that. Sometimes it feels overwhelming. Sometimes it feels like it can't be done, but I do know that it can be done, and it's possible. And not only that, but it is so crucially important. And I have so many feelings about so many things, but what I do know in my deepest of hearts or whatever is that all this work truly matters. When you do what I do, they tell you to get used to the losses, but it's still never easy. And maybe I'm not as strong as I'd like to be, but I will gather every ounce of strength I have for my children. I want them to know that this is bigger than the math. This is a lesson on how far their dreams can take them when they believe in themselves and when they have people to support them. It's been said that a child's future can be determined based on their birth mother's access to prenatal care. In other words, there are children that are born with the world stacked already against them. These children are products of a system that breaks them to pieces and then tells them to do something with a mess they never created. My kids don't need people to write them off. They need people to protect them, to love them, to be accountable to them. My students could write volumes about absence and loss, but many of them have known little of stability. I can't offer much, but I will give them all of my time and energy. I will throw myself to the mouth of the beast that is our education system and defend my precious sacks of hormones and misplaced aggression to the best of my ability. I may not be Miss A for the rest of my life, but right now it's who I am. I know the responsibility that title brings, and so I show up and love them every day. And then the last one is a prayer, kind of, for growth. And I've been thinking about ebb and flow a lot lately, about what it means to be inside my body, about what it means to occupy that really special place, and where I go when I stray away from that, and how I can find my way back to that. And there's a book called In the Wake of Blackness and Being by Christina Sharp, and in it she says, "But through all of that and more, my mother tried to make a small path through the wake. She brought beauty into that house in every way that she could. She worked at joy, and she made livable moments, spaces and places in the midst of all that was unlivable there." And so I've been thinking about this a lot because that's what I'm trying to intentionally do during this season of life, which is to create as many livable moments as I can for myself and for the people that I care about. And so I was thinking about growth, and this is where this last piece of writing came from. Is growing always forward motion, or does it sometimes require an honest excavation of the past and that which came before in order to build something new, something more sturdy and true? Perhaps to grow means to responsibly choose to be different. Perhaps it is deciding to become. Becoming is never giving up on the idea that there's always more growing to be done. Becoming requires equal parts patience and rigor and a belief in time. It's May, and things are starting to bud in and around me. Let this be a season of growth, of tilling soil with soft hands and gentle ease. I'm not interested in starting anew, but rather maintaining and recultivating what's already been. This magic has existed in me since I exhaled my first shaky breath, since the first fluttering of my eyelids. I've spent a lot of time burning bridges as if destruction is the only way to begin again. I say no more to that kind of thinking, to being cornered into a new start. I choose this budding, I choose this growth, because I can finally see all of the versions of me that I might one day be. I see all of the ways in which I am limitless, always evolving, always stretching boundaries and borders, and I choose to lean into this deliberate uncovering, to give into this turning of the page. I want to grow into something less destructive, more oxygen and less waste. This next iteration will be my most forgiving self. For it is when we allow ourselves to accept who we've been, we can become anything we want. And I will leave it at that.
Thank you, Ozy. That was so beautiful. I really appreciate you putting the energy and effort out there to share that all with us. And for all the rest of you guys for being here and all of you viewing online. It really means a lot to me that we're able to have these kind of conversations and be honest and hold each other accountable in these spaces and continue to learn each other and learn from each other and realize that, kind of like Relly said earlier, we're all just trying, like nobody's gotten it right yet. So let's keep on trying and taking those little steps forward because we desperately need to. And in order for us to keep pushing forward, we really do need to take accountability for ourselves and be just humble in that. So with that, I thank you for being with me for 2 hours and 15 minutes. I'm always like, it'll only be an hour and 15 minutes of conversation. And then an hour, 45 minutes, 2 hours later, I'm like, okay. But yes, thank you guys so much. Keep an eye out for the next nightcaps. I am already like planning to, because we need like all of them tomorrow, but I'm trying my hardest and I know you guys are all out there doing your own work. So thank you guys again so much, Riley, Mechelle, and Ozy for being here and trying to take a whack at what accountability looks like in your own micro communities and what that can look like also at a macro level. And we'll see you guys next time. Thanks, guys.